Hey, what's going on guys? It's Moto, and in today's video, I'm going to be changing the engine oil on my Yamaha TW200. So I've gathered a couple different things you're going to need for changing your engine oil, starting with your SAE 10W40, and you're going to need about 1.16 US quarts of this, and this is a 1-quart bottle, so I just picked up 2. Next, you're going to need your oil filter, and when choosing your oil filter, generally I like to go with the genuine Yamaha parts. But you can also choose different options from high quality brands like Tusk or K&N. When choosing your oil filter, any of these will work fine. You just want to make sure that you have a good reputable company. This is the genuine oil filter, and as you can see here, it's got 4 little holes. And you just want to make sure that whatever oil filter you pick up, it also has those holes. Looking at the Tusk, you can tell that the Tusk also has those 4 holes. And checking out the K&N also has those 4 holes. Alright, so moving on from the oil filters, you're also going to need a 19mm socket, a 10mm socket, and an 8mm socket. You're also going to need a 5mm Allen key. You're going to want to make sure you pick up a nice little funnel like this. Just to clean some of the parts, I picked up some glass cleaner as well as some brake cleaner and a couple of rags. Also, to keep the oil off your hands, you want to pick up some gloves. When installing the parts, you're going to want a torque wrench, and this torque wrench will be good for the drain bolt. But unfortunately, I don't have a torque wrench small enough for the oil filter element cover, so I'll have to do those by hand. And then the last thing you're going to want is some sort of oil container like this one. I just picked this up from Advanced Auto, and you just want to make sure that you don't dump any of the oil out. You want to save it in this and then bring it to a proper recycling center. Alright, so now that you've got all the tools you need, let's head over to the bike and get started. Also, depending on the condition of your O-rings, especially if your bike is older, it's a good idea to pick up some extra ones, just in case yours need to be replaced. Alright, so the first thing you want to do is just go ahead and warm up your bike, and this will allow the oil to run smoother when draining it. You could either take the bike for a quick spin around the block, or you can go ahead and idle it for a minute or two. Alright, and now that your engine oil has been warmed up, let's go ahead and start the oil change. So the first thing you want to do is remove the engine oil filler cap, which is located on the right hand side of your engine. And I'm just going to go ahead and clean the area first because I don't want any debris getting in. And I'm just going to use glass cleaner and a rag. And now that it's clean, go ahead and loosen this cap. This should just be hand tight. Be careful when removing it because it does have a small O-ring on it. And I'm just going to set this to the side on a clean towel. Alright, and next with your 10mm socket, go ahead and remove the skid plate, and it's just this one bolt here at the front. Alright, and once you remove that bolt, it just unhinges from the back. Alright, and once you've removed your skid plate, go ahead and position your drain container underneath your bike. And you want to make sure it's positioned properly so that it'll capture any of the oil that's drained from your drain plug. Next, go ahead and remove your drain bolt using your 19mm socket. And now's probably a good time to go ahead and put those gloves on. And once you've gotten it loose, you should be able to do the rest by hand. Alright, and once the oil starts to drain, just go ahead and slowly remove your cap. And removing my cap, normally there's a little spring and a filter that's attached to this, but mine did not come out all at once. So I'm just going to go ahead and remove it by hand. And it just falls right out, just like that. And I'm going to go ahead and set this down on my clean rag. Okay, and while the engine oil is draining, I'm just going to go ahead and clean up these 2 caps, as well as the filter and the spring. And before I clean this, I'm just going to go ahead and remove the gasket, just using a little flathead. Just to get underneath it, and it peels right up and pulls out. Same thing with this cap here. This one actually is just able to remove by hand. And then the spring and filter, they just pull apart just like that. And as you can tell, and I actually had one of my subscribers ask, but with the first oil change, you can expect to see a lot of debris. And this is just from the gears and the clutch kind of just breaking in. And as you can tell, there's a lot of debris on there. I'm going to make sure you go ahead and clean all that out. And to clean this, I'm just going to go ahead and spray it with some brake cleaner. Spray it all with brake cleaner. I'm also going to spray this cap, as well as the metal spring, and this cap. Now I'm just going to take a clean rag and just wipe them all down, trying to get all that debris off of them. And one thing with the brake cleaner is you want to make sure you don't spray it onto your rubber gaskets. And once you've cleaned all the metal debris off of these parts, I'm just going to go ahead and spray it one more time with brake cleaner. And then as far as your gaskets go, you want to make sure that they're clean. You want to make sure they're not dried out and they're not cracking. I'm just going to go ahead and wipe mine with a little rag. And as you can tell, mine are not dried or cracked at all, so I'm going to go ahead and reuse these. Alright, and back over here at the bike, let's go ahead and remove the oil filter cover. And before I remove it, mine's really dirty, so I'm just going to go ahead and clean it up with some glass cleaner. Alright, and now that your cover is clean, let's go ahead and remove the Allen key bolts here at the bottom. This is the oil filter drain bolt, and this is a 5mm Allen key. Alright, and removing this, pay attention to these 3 bolts because they are different sizes. And now let's remove our 2 8mm bolts up top. And this right one is significantly longer than the other 2. Okay, and once you remove those 3 bolts, let's go ahead and remove this cover. And it just pops off just like that. Alright, and as you can see, the oil filter is still in there, and I'm just going to use some needle nose pliers and just grab it. Be gentle, but it'll pull right out. And as you can tell, mine is full of metal shavings and debris, so definitely time to replace this. And to help clean this area out, I'm just going to use a clean rag and try and get all that dirty oil out of there. Also keep in mind when removing the drain bolt at the bottom, it does have a little O-ring, and mine stayed in place, but sometimes they may fall out, so just pay attention to that. And while cleaning this area out, I actually just realized that the gasket part of the old oil filter is still in there, and it looks like it just got stuck in there. And as you can tell on the new one, this is the part that I'm talking about. It's just this little rubber piece right here. So I'm just going to use my needle nose pliers and pull it out. Alright, so now that this area is clean, I'm going to go ahead and install the genuine Yamaha oil filter. And you want to make sure you install it with these 4 holes facing inwards, just like this. And I just push it in with my thumb a little bit. And before I go ahead and install the oil filter cap, I just took it over to the clean rags, and I'm going to go ahead and clean it off. Once again, removing this little O-ring, just like that. And same process, I'm just going to clean it with some brake cleaner and wipe it down. And this O-ring seems to be in good shape as well, so no need to replace it. Clean off the bolts as well. Okay, I'm just going to go ahead and put the O-ring back on here. Just like that. Okay, and back here at the bike, I'm going to go ahead and reinstall this cover. You want to make sure that this slot right here goes inside the hole, and it just goes on just like that. And I'm going to go ahead and start with the longer bolt up here at the top right. And make sure that you always hand tighten these first. You don't want to strip the threads. Next, I'm going to take the smaller bolt, and that goes in the top left. Line up the hole and thread it on. And then finally, I'm going to go ahead and take the Allen key bolts, the drain bolt here at the bottom, and install that. And I should have mentioned this earlier, but before installing this cover back on, make sure that that O-ring over here is in the proper place. Alright, and now that you've installed these 3 bolts, you can go ahead and using a torque wrench tighten them down to 10 Newton meters according to the owner's manual. And for any of the torque specs while doing the oil change on this bike, you can go to page 612 in your owner's manual, and they should have all the information there. Unfortunately, I don't have a torque wrench, so I'm going to do it by hand, and 10 Newton meters is not a lot. You don't want to strip these bolts, so I'm just going to do it nice and easy. And once again, this is your 8mm socket. And this Allen key at the bottom is a 5mm. All right, once all the oil is drained out of your bike, you can go ahead and reinstall this cap. And to install this, you want to make sure that your O-ring is back on it properly. And then you want to go ahead and reinstall the little filter onto the spring. Just sits like that. And then this whole piece gets inserted into the bike just like this. All right, and now that all the engine oil has been drained out, I'm just gonna go ahead and clean off this area with a rag. Okay, now that that area is all clean, I'm gonna go ahead and reinsert the spring and filter, just like that. And now I'm gonna go ahead and reinsert the cap right over that spring and filter. And you wanna make sure you don't improperly thread this. So you want to do it by hand. Okay, now that you've tightened that by hand and the filter and spring are all correctly in place, go ahead and take your 19mm socket and tighten it down the rest of the way. All right, and once it starts to get snug with the socket, go ahead and take your torque wrench, set it to 43 Newton meters, and torque it the rest of the way. All right, once you hear that click, you know you've hit 43 Newton meters, and this is all set. And now that you have your engine oil drain cap back on, I'm just gonna go ahead and remove the drain container so I don't spill it. All right, and now that all the caps are back on, it's time to go ahead and fill your bike back up with some oil. Once again, the TW200 takes just over a quart, so I picked up 2 of these bottles. And this is SAE 10W40. And it's best not to use full synthetic oils with this bike. And you also don't want to add any additives to it because it could affect your clutch. So using my funnel, I'm just going to go ahead and insert it into this little fill hole right here. And with the engine oil, I'm just going to fill 1 quart. All right, and with 1 quart filled up, I'm just gonna go ahead and take my other bottle and slowly pour a little bit in. Just like that. And I'm just gonna go down until I hit about the 28 mark over here on the bottle. And that should be plenty. All right, and now that you've filled your engine back up with oil, I'm just gonna go ahead and put this little O-ring back on this oil cap. Sits all the way at the bottom. And then I'm gonna go ahead and put the cap back on. And this is just hand tightened. Just like that. Okay, and so once you've filled the bike with oil, just go ahead and start it up. And this way it'll cycle all the oil will get to the filter. And then you can check the level to make sure that you have the proper amount of oil. All right, and after about a minute, you can go ahead and shut your bike off. And you want to take a look at the oil level. And to do this, you want to look at this gauge right here. And to use this gauge, the bottom line here is the minimum and the top line is the maximum oil level. And as you can tell, obviously there's no oil in there right now, but that's because the bike is leaning. To check this, you want to go ahead and I just hold it by the handlebar and pull it just so it's straight up and down. All right, and with the bike not leaning just like this, go ahead and check that level again. And as you can tell, the oil in mine is right in between both of those lines, and that should be perfect. All right, and the last thing to do now that you've checked the oil level is go ahead and reinstall your skid plate. And to do this, you want to make sure you hook it on the back first, just like that. And then take your little bolt over here and just line it up at the top and snug it back into place. And with your 10mm socket, just go ahead and hand tighten this. All right, and the last thing to do is just to double check to make sure the engine is getting the proper amount of oil. There's this little bolt right here. It's a 10mm bolt, and if you loosen that and a little bit of oil starts dripping out, that's how you know that the oil is properly circulated and you should be good to go. And I'm just gonna loosen it just a little bit with the bike on. And I know it's hard to tell, but there is a little bit of oil seeping out of that bolt, so it's good to go. Just gonna go ahead and tighten it back down. All right, and now that the oil's changed, let's go for a little ride. So overall, the oil change went great. It only took about 30 minutes, and it was super easy to do. For anyone that's on the fence about doing an oil change themselves versus bringing it in, especially if you have a TW200, I highly recommend doing it yourself. You're going to save yourself a lot of money, and it really doesn't take that much time. The parts themselves for the oil change on this bike are super inexpensive. It's only 2 quarts of oil, it's a little filter, and then if you need to replace your O-rings, the O-rings are usually just a couple of bucks. And if you were to bring it into a dealer, they could charge you, you know, $100 or something like that just for an oil change. You'd have to drop it off and wait. So this is the first oil change I've done on this bike. It's my 600-mile oil change, or technically 1 month oil change, even though I know I've gone a little bit over that. And as you can tell, just by looking in my oil as well as on the filter, there's a lot of debris, and that's just the gears and the clutch kind of breaking in. So that's to be expected with your first oil change. And now that I've done my first oil change, the next oil change I'm going to do, according to the manual, is at 4,000 miles. But I'm probably going to do mine a little bit sooner. I like to do it around like 2,500 to 3,000 miles. But either way, I'm sure it would be just fine for this bike. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'll make sure to leave all the torque specs down below. But you should be able to find everything in the manual. And I know that there's also a service manual for this bike, and apparently there's some discrepancies in the torque specs between the manual and the service manual. But overall, when torquing down any of the bolts on the bike, as long as you go by one of those manuals, you should be fine. And I'll make sure to leave links down below to any of the products that I used in this video, just in case you guys also want to use them. But as always, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you found this video helpful, and ride safe.